Schoolchildren who are still learning English typically take a federally required test shortly after the winter break that measures their fluency in the language. This school year is far from typical, of course, and many, if not most, of the country's roughly 5 million public school English learners are receiving instruction at home. Access an English proficiency test used by most states that takes up to 4 hours to complete can't be done remotely. Yet many states seem to be proceeding with business as usual, and it's unclear what that means for English learners who can't or opt not to return to campus. This oversight is being met by a rising tide of criticism from advocates and parents nationwide who say in-person testing could put English learners and their families at a greater risk of contracting COVID-19. The vast majority of English learners, -94%, are students of color, and those communities have been hit hardest by the pandemic. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention data shows that Latinos and blacks in the U.S. are almost 3 times as likely as their white counterparts to die from their virus. Latino and black children are 8 times and 5 times more likely than their white peers to be hospitalized with COVID-19, respectively. Some states, including Pennsylvania and Virginia, have extended their testing deadlines. But confusion and concern remains over whether students who don't take the assessment this year will face consequences. A coalition of groups, including the National Association for Bilingual Education and Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, recently wrote a letter to President-elect Joe Biden's transition team, saying the tests for English learners, also called EL students, should be postponed or made optional. While measuring EL students' proficiency of English remains important, EL students and their families should not be forced into schools and expose themselves to unnecessary risks during these unprecedented times. The letter states, to all of a sudden tell the hundreds of thousands of kids across the country that have been in remote learning that they'll have to come into school is especially concerning given the pandemic is at levels that far exceed those last spring, when the U.S. Department of Education waived testing requirements, said David Hinojosa, the director of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law's Educational Opportunities Project. In Florida, a petition launched last week by 2 Latino-focused advocacy groups asks the state's Department of Education to inform parents that the test is voluntary and ensure EL students won't be penalized for opting out of it. A similar petition was launched by teachers in Virginia. COVID-19 and schools suit claims California failed to educate poor and minority students during pandemic. The tests both help educators finesse their instruction of English learners and ensure schools are doing enough to promote those students' success. They're also one of the only, if not the only, standardized means of identifying whether students are still learning English and where they are in that progress. Arguments in favor of ongoing language proficiency testing echo those for administering annual academic assessments amid the pandemic. Some members of Congress, including Representative Bobby Scott, D. Virginia, and Senator Patty Murray, D. Washington, have described this year's academic assessments as a moral imperative given widespread learning losses dating back to last spring, when the same tests were put on hiatus. Those assessments tend to be administered later in the year. The movement around assessments and standardized testing was brought about because ELs and other students of color have been overlooked for so long, said Melissa Lazarin, a senior advisor for K-12 policy at the Migration Policy Institute's National Center on Immigrant Integration Policy. While learning loss among these and other student populations is well documented, these tests provide critical data that helps schools better understand how to prepare teachers and plan budgets. Though such students tend to get the hang of everyday interpersonal communication skills in as little as a year, research suggests the path to proficiency in formal academic English takes a lot longer, as many as 7 years. Still, experts stress there are a host of other tools and strategies that can advance those goals. 2 methods they say can prove especially valuable as schools strive to lift English learners out of a COVID-19 slide. For example, literacy in one's native language is one of the strongest predictors of how students will fare in reading and English development generally, according to a 2019 study of Spanish-speaking bilingual children. For English learners who are learning at home, schools can encourage immigrant parents to read with their children in their native language. Plus, observers fear the access results will be unreliable at a time when so many students are dealing with factors that could distort how they fare on a standardized test. Against the backdrop, students' performance on day 2, day assignments and quizzes may offer a better window into their grasp of the English language. If we were worried that a language proficiency exam is the only way to measure students, then we would, of course, look for a means of offering it, Hinojosa said. But the fact is that there is a lot of other information